And what a pleasure today that I'm going to be conversing with Rajan Naidu. Now, his intro is there in the chat, and you can read all about him. But I want to take one line from that introduction because I just think it says so much about our wonderful special spiritual guest today. Drawing inspiration from both his Hindu upbringing and his Quaker faith as a member of the Religious Society of Friends, Rajan approaches activism as a spiritual practice rooted in love, compassion, reverence for all life, and nonviolence. Welcome, Rajan.
Thank you, Victoria.
What a pleasure to have you. So, you're our first Quaker, you're our first friend that we've had as a special spiritual guest. So, for people who are not familiar with the society, could you just give us a little idea of the history and the belief system?
Yes, Quakers were founded in the 18th century or 17th century, 17th century, by a man called George Fox in England, and his big idea was that the church in those times was very top-down, hierarchical, and he believed that human beings have a direct connection, each individual and each being, with the divine, with the light, with the spirit. And so he advocated for a different kind of religious experience in which people sit in expecting silence for for the light, for um, for the divine to inform them. And this required no mediation from any priesthood. So Quakers don't have any priests or anybody in charge as such. There's no hierarchy as such. We have administration, and we need some kind of hierarchy within that, but um, generally we don't have that. Um, so the integrity of each human being is respected, and your vision is respected. And uh, oh, sorry,
Oh,
I'm very nervous.
that's beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit about the testimonies about peace and simplicity and some of the practices that are not common to
Yes.
all
Um,
religious faiths?
and this is one of the Quakers are quite different all over the world. I mean, there are some Quakers who are not um, evangelical, and some who are. But what does unite us is what we call the testimonies, which are the values. And generally, we say there are about six. You could say there are other numbers, but um, we find it very neat to use the acronym SPICES for which we got from America. That's an American idea, um, and it's simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equity, and sustainability. I say equity rather than equality because equity is a more respectful form. It takes into account our differences. We are all different and we have different needs. Um, and in relation to animals, um, simplicity. We reduce our reliance on animal products, and we have a simpler food chain, and we have a less exploitative lifestyle. And peace relates to we oppose animal agriculture violence and environmental harm and inequality. And our integrity is to do with honesty, telling the truth. So we align our actions with our values of compassion, truth, and justice for all beings. And our community is something which is a very strong value among Quakers, good community. And in relation to animals, we could support sustainable food systems that nourish all beings and reduce suffering. Equity is we recognize animal suffering as a justice issue, which very often we don't, but it's a justice issue, particularly for marginalized communities affected by animal agriculture. And the last one, sustainability. We live as sustainably as we can. Um, Animal agriculture is a leading cause of deforestation, climate change, and biodiversity loss. So these are the basic principles. If you have those about Quakers, you'll know a lot about what we are. We all relate to them, and it unites us. And we're very different. We're very diverse all around the world. But um, these basic principles, which are universal principles, we call them Quaker principles, but they're in fact common to all cultures. Um,
Hmm.
that's the case.
And for you growing up Hindu, what does that do now that you're a friend?
That's interesting. I was when we came to this country, I was 2 years old. So I was not brought up in a Hindu environment, but
Okay.
my background is Hindu, and my father was a Hindu scholar, and so I was brought up with he was of a philosophical bent of mind, and he would talk about all religions and all philosophies and politics all the time, and we didn't ha like Quakers. I mean, he belonged to a sect of Hinduism. He was brought up under a system called Arya Samaj, which was which is a monotheistic um, version of Hinduism. And one of the things they don't have is we don't have icons or anything like that in our homes. So I was brought up in a house which, if you go to most houses, Hindu houses, you'll see there will be statues or pictures of gods or goddesses there. In my family, we never had those, and we didn't have any shrine of any kind. Um, so the practices were very much um, moral and ethical practices. We were brought up with a strong uh, promotion of social justice, peace, integrity, truth telling. That was very strong in my upbringing. So already I was primed really for being very close to Quakers already.
Mhm.
So that was interesting.
Well, it is, and it's very interesting to me because I have some similarities in my life. I was raised largely by this incredible nanny who was
Mm.
in Unity, which is a lovely Christian tradition over here, founded in the 1890s by vegetarians.
Yes.
And so in the peace movement in the 1960s, I discovered the Friends, and then I moved to London and
Hmm.
wandered into the Westminster Friends meeting and was just utterly in awe of the courage of the people who at that time were literally putting themselves in front of planes and doing these other incredibly brave actions as statements of peace. Now, I didn't notice that people tended to be vegetarian or vegan, but it really stuck with me. And then later back in the States, I was part of a friends meeting in Downers Grove, Illinois. And I always say that my daughter would not exist if it were not for that friends meeting because there was such this beautiful family ideation and how people were raising their children was just so enticing. I
Mm.
knew I needed to do it. So there is great admiration. So talk to me a little bit about your own personal vegan journey. How did you find that?
Okay. I must have been about 7 years old and I was in school, and in the canteen, um, it looked out onto a little field. There was a field, and there were chickens on the field, and I'd seen those for a long time, and I loved them, and watched them moving around, clucking, and I was sitting eating my food, and I looked out, and there was a young man who was picking the chickens up, wringing their necks, and throwing them very roughly into a wheelbarrow, and I saw them writhing there. And I was shocked, I was shocked, and I was 7 years old, and I had never made the connection before between chickens in a field and chicken on a plate. And suddenly it dawned why he was doing this. And it's interesting, it's an obvious thing, but as a child you don't always understand the obvious. But that moment crystallized it for me, and I couldn't eat animals after that. So I went home and I told my mother what I'd seen, and because we come from a Hindu background, um, it was easy. I mean, maybe if I'd been in an English background, it would have been a big problem. But they understood that because culturally, vegetarianism is very common and very accepted among Hindus. And so that was wonderful. So after my mother, without any problem, catered for me as being vegetarian, and she was very careful. So there was meat in the household, and she'd be very careful not to cross-contaminate anything, and she would use um, different utensils for my food and for the other ones. So it was like very respectful. It's like kosher, like it was kept like that. And so yeah, so I was very fortunate. Um, and I remained vegetarian, and I had the values which and ideas which make you a vegetarian. This compassion for animals and um, to do with sustainability and environmental damage. And I was vegetarian for many years, and it took me a long time to become vegan. And I feel a bit embarrassed about that because the values which make you vegetarian are exactly the same ones which make you vegan. It's simply if you live them fully, you become vegan. All the ideas which convince you to be a vegetarian, if you follow them to their logical conclusion, you'd be a vegan. And I wish I had, because then I would have been responsible for less harm to animals over many years. But anyhow, our life journey is our life journey, and it takes
It
what it.
is.
Um, so eventually I became a vegan. I was becoming more and more vegan anyway. And then I decided, okay, now from now on I'm completely fanatically vegan. And
Ah,
and I just did it. And the interesting thing is when you become vegan, people imagine that you have cravings for food. And I used to love cheese, for example, cheeses of all kind, um, cream and butter. I used to love these things. It was part of my upbringing. Um, but now, if you show me a piece of cheese which I would have loved before, I can look at it and I can say, well, yes, I used to like that, and I have no qualms, no nostalgia for it at all. I think, yes, I used to do that, but I didn't understand those then. I wouldn't eat it now because it's not something I would eat. I don't consider
yes.
it to be food for me because of its associations and the harm it comes from. Um, yes.
Yeah, I can so see that when you're talking about that. I was hearing St. Paul, when I was a child, I thought as a child, and
Yeah.
now I put away childish things, or in this case, harmful things.
Mhm.
So it does sound to me that there's more prevalence of vegetarian veganism, concern for animals, perhaps in the UK than here. I know you did spend some time with Quakers in the US. I've been looking at American culture, particularly the past several weeks with the World
Mhm.
Cup, and seeing English people, Europeans, people from South America reflecting back what the US looks like to them. And it does
Yes.
seem that we have something of this cowboy culture that's very much a part of America. And I wonder, I mean, I know, for example, one of the friends' schools that I was familiar with, and some of my friends were sending their children there, boarding school in Iowa, raised pigs and slaughtered their own pigs there at the school, which seems so different from the things that you were talking about. Is that what you mean by the autonomy of friends, that people are free to do what they wish?
Yes, and in Britain, I would say, I mean, we don't know exactly, we don't know the stats exactly, but we estimate about 30% of Quakers are vegetarian vegan. And I've seen the numbers increase over the years. You referred to Westminster meeting. I just want to say one
Yes.
thing about Westminster meeting. So Westminster meeting has had it's been broken into twice by the police to break up peaceful meetings of activists who were there. It's completely a wrong thing for the police to have done, but they did it. It's becoming quite repressive in this country. And another thing is that in 2019, I submitted an article to The Friend, which is a weekly journal of Britain Yearly Meeting, and it was on how Quaker values are very closely aligned with vegan values. And that article, it was quite widely read and quite known. And that was 2019. And I went to Westminster meeting some years after that. And on a notice board, as I went in, somebody had photocopied that article, and it was in the corner in the room, and nobody had taken it down. Or it's it's really amazing, that more than 5 years after I'd written it, it was still being there, being used by people, referred to by people.
Ah,
So
that's good. And there's a link to that in the chat so that people can see it. I'm so sorry to hear about what you're saying about the repression in the UK, because we're
yeah,
certainly seeing it here as well. So it's something global.
I see these things as very much connected. I see it as one struggle, is justice and peace in the world, the suffering of human beings, the suffering of animals, the suffering of everything on our planet. And I see it as very much connected. Um, and we don't look at just one part and ignore the rest. I think we have to be consistent and complete. And it's challenging, and it's at a cost. I think Quakers are used to, over the centuries, paying that cost.
Yes,
Radical integrity. Radical integrity is what we're about. That you're
yeah.
not just you have your values, but you live your values, and that sometimes brings you into conflict with authorities.
It does indeed, historically, and as you're showing us today. I know it's late where you are, but if you can manage to stay for breakout group and share with some people who would like to know a little more, that would be lovely. And
I
either
certainly will.
way, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for staying up late for the Compassion Consortium.
No, it's a pleasure. It's an
All
honor.
the best. Thank you.